They say some people walk through life unseen, unnoticed, as if they were shadows in a world bursting with light. For years, Elena Marquez was one of those shadows. She had been the kind of woman who stayed in the background, quiet and selfless, supporting her husband while he chased ambition and luxury. She cooked meals he never tasted, listened to stories he never cared to finish, and offered love that was returned with silence. Her husband, Daniel, was once her everything. But over time, Elena became invisible to him. While she wore the same faded coat winter after winter, he wore expensive suits and smiled brightly in photographs with the woman who replaced her. That woman was younger, louder, flashier, and Daniel paraded her through the same streets where Elena walked unseen. One night, as Elena passed a restaurant near Times Square, she saw him there, her ex-husband, laughing, holding his new partner's hand, as if the years with Elena had never existed. Her heart clenched, but she kept walking. No tears, no confrontation, just the weight of invisibility pressing deeper into her chest. Elena's world was small, a modest Brooklyn apartment with peeling paint and creaking floors. She worked as a waitress at a small cafe, where customers barely remembered her name. She was polite, kind, and efficient, but rarely noticed. Every day felt the same. A clock ticking away in monotony. A woman surviving, but not truly living. Yet within her heart, there was a quiet strength, a resilience no one acknowledged. She endured humiliation, loneliness, and poverty without complaint. And that resilience was about to be tested in ways she could never imagine. One evening, after finishing her late shift, Elena returned home to find an envelope slipped under her door. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't junk mail. The envelope was heavy, sealed with an unfamiliar crest. Elena frowned, holding it up to the dim light of her apartment. Elena, softly to herself, "What is this?" She opened it carefully, her fingers trembling as if her instincts already knew this letter carried something unusual. Inside was a handwritten note. The penmanship was elegant, the ink dark and deliberate. "Dear Miss Marquez, if you are reading this, then I have left this world behind. Our paths crossed briefly, but in you, I saw a kindness that many overlook. I wish for you to meet with my legal representatives, for there are matters of great importance to discuss. Edward Anderson." Elena's brows furrowed. Her breath caught in her throat. Elena, whispering, "Edward Anderson? The professor?" Years ago, when Elena was still with Daniel, she had worked part-time at a library. That's where she met Edward Anderson, a quiet, aging professor who spent hours buried in books, avoiding the chatter of the outside world. Unlike others who dismissed him as eccentric or dull, Elena treated him with genuine warmth. She remembered offering him tea during long evenings, smiling when he spoke about history and philosophy, even when no one else listened. He was lonely. She could see it in his eyes. And though they were never close friends, their interactions had been gentle reminders that kindness costs nothing. Now, years later, Edward's letter was in her hands. Elena sat on the edge of her worn-out sofa, staring at the words as if they might disappear. Elena, to herself, "Why me? What could he possibly want with me?" She didn't know it yet, but this letter was about to drag her from the shadows of invisibility into a world of unimaginable power. The following week, Elena arrived at a towering Manhattan law office, feeling out of place in her simple dress and scuffed shoes. The building's marble floors gleamed under golden chandeliers. Men in tailored suits and women in designer heels swept past her, barely noticing the quiet woman clutching an envelope. She felt small, insignificant, But when she gave her name at the reception, heads turned. Whispers followed her as she was escorted into a private office. There, 3 attorneys sat behind an imposing wooden desk. Files were neatly stacked before them, and in the center lay a leather-bound folder with her name embossed in gold, Elena Marquez. Her heart pounded. One of the attorneys, a sharp-eyed man with silver hair, spoke first. Attorney: Ms. Marquez, thank you for coming. As you are aware, Mr. Edward Anderson has passed away. His will contains unexpected instructions. You may want to sit down. Elena swallowed hard, sinking into the chair. Elena, nervously, unexpected instructions? The attorney opened the folder. His tone was calm, but the words he spoke thundered through Elena's world. Attorney: Mr. Anderson has left you his entire estate. This includes Anderson Global Enterprises, real estate holdings, and personal assets valued at over $20 billion. For a moment, time stood still. Elena's lips parted, but no words came. $20 billion? Her mind reeled. This had to be a mistake. She was a waitress, living paycheck to paycheck. She couldn't even afford a new coat. And now they were telling her she owned one of the largest business empires in the country? Elena, shaking her head. This can't be right. I barely knew him. Why would he? The attorney leaned forward, his expression serious. Attorney: Mr. Anderson was a man who valued integrity above all else. In his notes, he wrote that you showed him a rare kindness when others ignored him. He believed you were the only one capable of carrying forward his legacy with sincerity. Elena's hands trembled. Her chest felt heavy. 1,000 thoughts swirled in her mind: disbelief, fear, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Elena, softly: Legacy? Me? But it was true. The papers were signed, sealed, and legal. In the eyes of the law, Elena Marquez had just inherited $20 billion, and the empire of a man who saw in her something no one else did. As she left the law office, flashes of cameras nearly blinded her. News had already leaked. Reporters shouted her name, microphones thrust toward her as headlines screamed across the city. Waitress inherits billion-dollar empire. Mystery woman named sole heir to Edward Anderson's fortune. Gold digger or guardian of a legacy. Elena froze under the chaos. The same people who had ignored her for years now fought to photograph her. Her face, once invisible, was plastered across every screen in New York. But behind the frenzy, Elena's heart whispered the truth. This wasn't just about wealth. This was a test. A challenge. And she had no idea that with every step forward, powerful enemies were already waiting, ready to tear her apart. Inheritance fallout, media chaos, and the gala revelation. The city of New York was buzzing. Every television, every phone screen, every front page carried her name, Elena Marquez. The world wanted answers. Who was this woman? Where had she come from? Why would a billionaire, a man as private as Edward Anderson, leave his entire empire to someone who once served coffee in a small cafe? For Elena, the days following the revelation were a blur of chaos. Paparazzi camped outside her apartment, flashing cameras through the windows at all hours. Neighbors she barely knew now knocked on her door, pretending to check in, but really just fishing for details. The media painted her as a mystery. Some called her the lucky waitress. Others accused her of seduction and manipulation, labeling her a gold digger. The cruelest voices came from women who once smiled at her politely, now spitting venom in online forums. She must have slept her way to the top. There's no way this is legit. He was old, she was young, do the math. She doesn't deserve it. That money belongs to his real family or the company." Elena read the headlines with a heavy heart. Her quiet life had been ripped open, exposed, and twisted into a story she didn't recognize. One night, unable to sleep, Elena sat at her kitchen table, staring at the letter Edward had left her. Elena, whispering to herself, "Why me, Edward? Why did you do this to me? I didn't ask for this." Her phone buzzed. Dozens of missed calls from reporters, strangers, even Daniel, her ex-husband. She ignored them all. But then, one message stood out. It was from Anderson Global's board of directors. They had arranged for Elena to make her first public appearance at the company's annual charity gala. Attendance wasn't optional. It would be the night the world truly met Elena Marquez, and the night she realized just how powerful and dangerous her new life would be. The day of the gala arrived like a storm. For the first time in years, Elena wasn't invisible. She was the center of everything. She sat in a penthouse suite as stylists and designers fluttered around her like moths to flame. Makeup brushes swept across her skin, dresses were draped over her shoulders, and jewelry sparkled under the lights. Elena caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized herself. The woman staring back wasn't the quiet waitress from Brooklyn. She was elegant, radiant, and commanding. For the first time, Elena saw herself not as invisible, but as undeniable. Elena, softly to herself, "This isn't me, or maybe it's who I was meant to be." That evening, black cars lined up outside the Anderson Foundation Hall. The air shimmered with wealth, designer gowns, glittering jewels, and the scent of power. Reporters lined the red carpet, cameras flashing as billionaires and celebrities swept past. And then, the moment came. The doors of Elena's car opened. Gasps rippled through the crowd as she stepped out, her gown a deep emerald green, her hair cascading like silk. The once-forgotten woman walked forward with poise, every camera snapping, every eye locked on her. The whispers began immediately. "That's her? Impossible. She looks incredible." But admiration was mixed with poison. "She doesn't belong here. She bought that dress with money she didn't earn. This is Edward Anderson's legacy? A waitress in pearls." Elena heard every word, but she didn't falter. With every step, she carried herself higher, refusing to bow under the weight of their judgment. Inside the grand hall, crystal chandeliers lit up the faces of the city's most powerful elite. At the center of it all was the stage, where Anderson Global's leadership was preparing to speak. Elena took her seat near the front, her presence drawing both stares and sneers. At last, Jonathan Sterling, one of Edward's longtime rivals and a key figure on the Anderson board, took the podium. He was tall, silver-tongued, and dangerous in the way only seasoned men of power could be. Jonathan, addressing the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate legacy, the vision of Edward Anderson, whose brilliance and dedication built the empire we see today. His absence is deeply felt, but his vision will continue through this company, through its board, and through all of us who stood by his side." The audience applauded. Cameras flashed. Jonathan's words dripped with confidence. But Elena noticed something. Not once did he mention her. Not once did he acknowledge the woman Edward had chosen as heir. And then, as if on cue, Jonathan's voice sharpened. "Jonathan, and while questions remain about Mr. Anderson's final decisions, let us not forget that legacies are fragile. They can be tarnished by inexperience, by outsiders who do not understand the weight of such responsibility." The crowd murmured. All eyes shifted to Elena. Her chest tightened. This was no accident. Jonathan was targeting her, publicly, mercilessly. For a moment, Elena considered staying silent, shrinking back into invisibility like she always had. But something inside her broke free. She rose from her seat, the sound of her heels echoing through the hall. Gasps filled the room as the cameras turned, every lens trained on her. Elena, calm, steady. "You speak of legacy, Mr. Sterling. But Edward Anderson didn't choose you. He chose me. And he chose me for a reason." The room fell silent. Jonathan's smirk faltered. Elena, her voice gaining strength. "Edward believed legacy wasn't about wealth or power or who sits at the highest table. He believed it was about integrity, compassion, and resilience. He saw something in me you refused to see, a strength that doesn't need to shout to be real." Her words sliced through the tension like a blade. Elena, firmly, "So let me make this clear. I will honor Edward's legacy. I will protect it. And I will prove to everyone here that I am not an outsider. I am the rightful heir. And I am just getting started." The room erupted. Some applauded, others sneered, but no one could deny it anymore. Elena Marquez was no longer invisible. She had claimed her place in front of the most powerful people in the city, and they would never forget the fire in her voice. Jonathan Sterling's eyes narrowed. His smirk returned, but this time it carried something darker, the promise of war. As the gala continued, Elena knew this was only the beginning. Tonight, she had announced herself to the world. Tomorrow, she would face battles that would test her strength in ways she never imagined. Enemies were waiting. Alliances would shift. And the empire she had inherited would either break her or transform her into something far greater. The fallout, media scandals, and the first boardroom war. The night of the gala changed everything. Elena's fiery words had silenced an entire room of billionaires, but outside those walls, the storm had only just begun. By the next morning, her speech was everywhere. News anchors dissected every sentence, bloggers twisted her defiance into arrogance, and social media burned with debate. Some praised her courage. "She's a queen. Edward chose her for a reason. Finally, someone who's not afraid of the boardroom boys club." But others tore her apart. "What does she know about business? She's a fraud. She's playing dress-up with billions that don't belong to her. Anderson Global is doomed under her." Elena scrolled through the comments, her chest tightening. She wanted to shut it all out, but she couldn't. The world was watching, waiting for her to slip. And her enemies were already sharpening their knives. A week later, Elena entered Anderson Global's towering headquarters for the first time. The skyscraper loomed like a fortress of glass and steel, intimidating and unwelcoming. Inside, executives moved with purpose, their designer suits like armor, their eyes cold and assessing. Every step Elena took echoed in the marble lobby, as if reminding her how far she was from the quiet life she once knew. When she stepped into the boardroom, the atmosphere shifted. Conversation stopped. Dozens of eyes, all male, all skeptical, locked on her. At the head of the table sat Jonathan Sterling. His expression was calm, but his smirk betrayed his satisfaction. Jonathan, smoothly, "Ah, Ms. Marquez, the heiress herself. Welcome to the lion's den." The men around the table chuckled. Elena tightened her jaw, refusing to shrink. The meeting began. Charts flashed across screens, numbers rolled off tongues, and jargon filled the air. The executive spoke quickly, deliberately, drowning Elena in a sea of terminology she barely understood. It was a tactic. They wanted to overwhelm her. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, watching her with predatory amusement. Jonathan, mocking politeness, Of course, we don't expect you to grasp all of this right away. These are complicated matters. Best leave them to those with experience." The men around him smirked, their arrogance thick in the air. For a moment, Elena's heart raced. She felt like that quiet waitress again, invisible, out of place, unwanted. But then she remembered Edward's words in his letter. Integrity. Resilience. She straightened her shoulders and spoke. Elena, calm but firm. "You're right, Mr. Sterling. I don't know everything yet. But what I do know is that Edward Anderson trusted me with this legacy. And I won't dishonor that trust by hiding in silence. I will learn. I will adapt. And I will prove to all of you why he chose me." Her voice carried across the room, steady and unshaken. The smirks faltered. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. For the first time, he saw something in Elena he hadn't expected, defiance. But he wasn't done testing her. Jonathan, leaning forward, voice sharp. Bold words. "But business isn't built on sentiment, Ms. Marquez. It's built on blood, sweat, and ruthless precision. Are you willing to make hard decisions? To get your hands dirty? Or are you here to play dress-up while men like me run the company?" The tension crackled like electricity. Elena looked him in the eye. Elena, steadily. "I'm not here to play dress-up. I'm here to lead. And I don't need to be ruthless to be strong. I'll run this company with integrity. Something you seem to underestimate." A hush fell over the room. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Jonathan leaned back, his smirk returning, but there was no humor in it now. Only warning. After the meeting, Elena retreated to Edward's old office. The room was a museum of power, shelves lined with rare books, portraits of history's great leaders, and a desk that looked more like a throne than a workspace. She sat in the chair, her hands brushing over its polished surface. For a moment, the weight of it all crashed down. The fortune, the responsibility, the enemies. Elena, to herself, softly, "What am I doing here, Edward? How do I live up to something I don't even understand?" Her voice trembled, but her resolve didn't break. She knew one thing. Giving up wasn't an option. The following days were relentless. Headlines screamed about her inexperience. Analysts predicted Anderson Global's downfall. Tabloids dug into her past, twisting her heartbreak into scandal. One article in particular made her stomach drop. "Ex-husband speaks out. Elena Marquez was always obsessed with power." Daniel. He had gone to the press, painting her as manipulative, cold, and ambitious. A woman who had schemed her way into Edward's fortune. Elena read his words with trembling hands. The betrayal cut deep, reopening old wounds. Elena, bitterly, "Even now, you're trying to erase me." But this time, she wouldn't let him. A week later, Elena returned to the boardroom. Jonathan Sterling was waiting, his eyes gleaming with the confidence of a man who thought he had already won. But Elena walked indifferently this time. No hesitation. No fear. She carried folders of her own, research she had spent sleepless nights compiling, guided by Edward's old journals and advisors who still believed in his vision. When Jonathan began to dominate the conversation, Elena interrupted. Elena, firmly, "You're ignoring the numbers. Anderson Global isn't failing, it's stagnant. And you know why? Because you're so focused on profit margins that you've forgotten the company's soul." The room went silent. Jonathan, mocking, "The company's soul? This is business, Ms. Marquez, not poetry." Elena, meeting his gaze. "Edward built this empire not just on money, but on vision, on innovation, on trust. And if you think I'll let you strip it of that, You're mistaken." The executive shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, Jonathan wasn't in full control. That day, Elena didn't win the board over completely. But she had planted a seed. A realization began to spread. Perhaps she wasn't just a naive heiress. Perhaps she was something more dangerous, a leader who could not be intimidated. Jonathan Sterling left the meeting with a smile, but it wasn't one of victory. It was the smile of a man preparing for war. And Elena knew it. She looked out the window of Edward's office, the city sprawling below her, glowing with ambition and greed. Elena, to herself, "You chose me for a reason, Edward. I won't let them destroy you. I won't let them destroy me." Her journey was no longer about surviving invisibility. It was about proving that even in a world of sharks, a woman of integrity could rise and change everything. But integrity alone would not be enough. She was about to learn just how deep the shadows of Edward Anderson's empire truly ran. Secrets revealed, betrayal strikes, and Elena's next transformation. The boardroom war with Jonathan Sterling had only just begun. But the more Elena tried to learn about Anderson Global, the more she realized that Edward's empire was built on secrets, some noble, some dangerous. Late one night, Elena sat in Edward's office, surrounded by piles of old journals and letters. His handwriting was elegant but heavy, as if each word carried a burden. One entry made her blood run cold. "I trusted Jonathan Sterling once. He was like a brother to me. But betrayal hides in ambition. He took what wasn't his, and he left scars I'll never forgive. One day, justice must be served, even if I'm not the one to deliver it." Elena stared at the page, her heart racing. Elena, whispering, "So this is why you chose me. You wanted someone to finish what you couldn't." The revelation was overwhelming. She wasn't just an heir. She was the weapon Edward had left behind, the final move in a game of vengeance he had been playing against Jonathan Sterling. The next morning, the media storm escalated. Newspapers released articles suggesting Elena was unfit to run the company. Anonymous sources leaked claims that she had no business experience, no credentials, and no right to lead. On live television, one commentator sneered, "Anderson Global is circling the drain. Edward's legacy is in the hands of a waitress who probably doesn't know the difference between a balance sheet and a menu." The audience laughed. Elena watched from her office, her fists clenched. It wasn't just ridicule, it was sabotage. Someone inside the company was feeding the press. But who? Her suspicion was confirmed that afternoon when Richard Caldwell, Edward's longtime advisor, walked into her office. He was a man of calm authority, sharp-eyed and measured. "Richard, you're being tested, Elena. The leaks, the scandals, this isn't random. Someone inside wants you out before you can even begin." Elena frowned. "Elena, Jonathan." Richard shook his head slowly. "Richard, Jonathan is the obvious enemy, but he doesn't work alone. There are others on this board who resent Edward's decision. They'll smile to your face and stab you in the back the moment you turn." Elena's chest tightened. "Elena, so I can't trust anyone." Richard gave her a long look. "Richard, you can trust yourself. That's enough." The very next board meeting proved him right. Documents were presented claiming that Elena had mishandled company funds, accusations that were completely false. But the evidence had been fabricated so carefully, it looked almost real. Jonathan Sterling's voice carried across the room with venomous satisfaction. "Jonathan, it seems, Ms. Marquez, that your inexperience has already caused serious irregularities. Perhaps this proves what I've been saying, that the company cannot afford to be run by sentiment and naivete. Gasps filled the room. The executives whispered, already doubting her. Elena felt the sting of betrayal. Someone inside had set this up. And if she didn't fight back, she would lose everything. Elena stood, her voice calm but cutting. Elena, interesting, because I've spent the past week studying every financial record this company has. And I can tell you exactly which account these supposed irregularities come from. The room went silent. Elena, slamming a folder onto the table. This account, conveniently tied to a project Jonathan Sterling oversaw 3 years ago. And if anyone here bothers to look past the lies, they'll see that these documents have been altered. The real irregularities belong to him, not me. Jonathan's smirk faltered. Jonathan, snarling, "You're accusing me of fraud?" Elena, coldly, "I'm not accusing. I'm stating. And if you continue this little game, I'll make sure the world knows exactly what kind of man you are." The tension was electric. Jonathan leaned back, his jaw tight. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. Elena had turned the trap back on him, and for the first time, he looked unsettled. That night, Elena returned home exhausted but triumphant. She had survived the board's attempt to destroy her. But as she sat in her apartment, peeling off the layers of elegance, she realized how much this life was changing her. The invisible woman who once served tables was gone. In her place was someone sharper, braver, fiercer. And yet, beneath the steel, her heart still ached. She thought of Edward, the man who had trusted her with his legacy. She thought of Daniel, her ex-husband, who now poisoned her reputation for his own gain. And she thought of Jonathan Sterling, whose smile hid daggers. Elena, to herself, "This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about proving I belong here. And I will." The next week brought another storm. A tabloid leaked photographs of Elena from years ago. Simple, grainy images of her working as a waitress, carrying trays in her worn uniform. The headlines were cruel. "Billion-dollar heiress used to clean tables. From apron to empire, the joke of the century." But instead of shame, Elena felt fire. She decided to use the photos to her advantage. At a press conference, Elena stood tall before flashing cameras. She held up one of the very photographs meant to humiliate her. "Elena, yes, this was me. A waitress. Invisible to the world. And I'm not ashamed of it. Because it taught me resilience. It taught me humility. And it taught me that worth isn't measured in money or titles, but in how you carry yourself when no one is watching." Reporters murmured. Her voice cut through their cynicism like steel. Elena, firmly, "So let them laugh. Let them call me names. Edward Anderson didn't choose me because of where I came from. He chose me because of who I am. And I will not fail him. I will not fail this company. And I will not fail myself." The room erupted in questions, but the tone had shifted. The heiress they mocked had just turned their insults into her weapon. But behind the applause and shifting headlines, Elena knew the war wasn't over. Jonathan Sterling wasn't defeated, only wounded. And a wounded man of power is the most dangerous enemy of all. As she stared out of Edward's office window that evening, the city lights blinking like restless eyes, Elena whispered to herself, "Elena, you left me your empire, Edward. But you also left me your enemies. And I will face them, one by one." She didn't know it yet, but the next betrayal would come from someone closer than she ever imagined. The betrayal inside Elena's circle and Edward's darkest secret revealed. Every empire has cracks, hidden beneath the surface. And Elena was about to discover that even Edward Anderson's empire was built on shadows darker than she ever imagined. The weeks after Elena's public stand were a battlefield. She had gained respect from some, suspicion from others. But with each step, she felt herself standing taller, stronger, more certain that Edward hadn't chosen her by mistake. Richard Caldwell, Edward's trusted advisor, continued to guide her. He was stern, unyielding, but his advice was always precise. Elena began to rely on him, even trust him. But trust is a dangerous thing. One evening, Richard entered her office with a file. His expression was unreadable. "Richard, you've been making progress. The board can't deny it. But if you truly want to secure your position, you need to know the truth about Edward. All of it." Elena hesitated. "Elena, the truth? What do you mean?" Richard placed the file on her desk. "Richard, Edward wasn't just a visionary. He was a man haunted by betrayal. And Jonathan Sterling wasn't his only enemy. There's more, things he never told the public. Things you must understand if you're going to lead." Elena opened the file. What she saw made her blood run cold. Inside were contracts, letters, and reports. Edward Anderson and Jonathan Sterling had once been partners, not rivals. They built their first company together, side by side. But greed poisoned their bond. Jonathan stole key investors, leaving Edward bankrupt. The betrayal had nearly destroyed him. But Edward rebuilt himself, smarter, stronger. He built Anderson Global from the ground up, but never forgave Jonathan. Every move he made afterward was a calculated step in their silent war. And now, Elena realized she was part of that war. Elena, softly, "So I was never just an heir. I was his weapon." The revelations weighed heavily on her. She wanted to honor Edward's legacy, but what if that legacy was poisoned by vengeance? That night, she dreamed of Edward's weary eyes, the sorrow hidden behind his brilliance. And when she woke, she understood her challenge wasn't just to protect his empire. It was to decide whether to continue his fight for revenge, or carve her own path. But while Elena wrestled with the past, betrayal was already closing in. A confidential strategy memo she had prepared, outlining her vision for revitalizing Anderson Global, suddenly appeared in the hands of a journalist. The leak was catastrophic. The press twisted her ideas into recklessness, painting her as naive and unprepared. The source of the leak? Someone inside her circle. Elena felt the walls closing in. She trusted only Richard, and a small handful of Edward's old staff. Could one of them have betrayed her? At the next board meeting, Jonathan Sterling wasted no time striking. Jonathan, mocking, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the kind of leadership we now have. Radical, inexperienced, and dangerous. Ms. Marquez may have passion, but passion doesn't keep shareholders happy. It destroys companies." The executives nodded, murmuring. The tide was turning against her. Elena rose, her voice sharp. "Elena, those ideas weren't reckless. They were innovative. And Edward believed in innovation. He built this empire by defying convention, not bowing to it." Jonathan smirked. "Jonathan, ah, but Edward was a genius. You, Ms. Marquez, are not." The insult cut deep, but Elena held her ground. When the meeting ended, Elena retreated to her office, fury boiling in her chest. She slammed the door shut, pacing. Then Richard entered quietly, closing the door behind him. "Richard, you can't let him get to you. Jonathan thrives on anger. The moment you show weakness, he wins." Elena turned sharply. "Elena, weakness? He called me a fraud in front of the entire board. Someone is leaking my plans, Richard. Someone close to me. And if I don't find out who, he'll bury me." Richard's gaze darkened. For the first time, Elena wondered if there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not loyalty, but calculation. That night, as Elena sifted through documents in her office, she found something odd. A file Edward had marked, "For eyes only," hidden at the back of his safe. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A name, Richard Caldwell. And beneath it, Edward's words, "He is both my most loyal ally and my greatest judge. If he stands against you, you are not worthy of this legacy." Elena's stomach dropped. Richard, the man she trusted most, wasn't just her advisor. He was her test, her judge. The one Edward had left behind to decide whether she deserved to carry the Anderson empire. The next day, Elena confronted him. Elena, holding the paper. You knew Edward wanted you to test me, to push me, to judge whether I'm worthy." Richard didn't flinch. Richard, "Yes, and I am still deciding." Elena's voice trembled with anger. Elena, "So all this time, you've been leaking information? Sabotaging me?" Richard shook his head slowly. Richard, "No, that wasn't me. But I've watched how you respond to pressure, to betrayal. Edward didn't want someone who would crumble. He wanted someone who could fight." Elena stared at him, torn between fury and confusion. Elena, "And if I don't meet your standards? What then?" Richard's voice was low, dangerous. Richard, "Then you'll lose everything, just as Edward intended." The truth shook her to her core. She wasn't just fighting Jonathan Sterling. She was being tested by Edward's most trusted confidant. Every move she made was being judged. Every choice weighed. And somewhere in the shadows, the real betrayer still hid, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The pressure mounted. Reporters hounded her every move. The board questioned her every decision. And in the quiet of her apartment, Elena felt the weight of invisibility again, but this time, it was different. She was no longer invisible to the world. She was visible in the harshest way possible, and every eye was waiting for her to fall. Elena stood before the mirror, staring at her reflection. The woman in the glass was no longer fragile, no longer unseen. She was fire forged in pressure, steel sharpened by betrayal. Elena, to herself fiercely, "They can test me all they want. They can betray me, mock me, try to break me, but I will not fail. Not this time." Her transformation was no longer about Edward's legacy. It was about her own. And the next battle would prove just how far she was willing to go. Jonathan's counterattack, the traitor revealed, and Elena's fall before her rise. Every storm begins with a whisper. And in the high towers of Anderson Global, the storm was about to break over Elena Marquez. Jonathan Sterling had been waiting patiently, studying her every move. He knew Elena had gained ground. The press was no longer mocking her. They were cautiously respecting her. Investors were curious, even hopeful. That couldn't continue. So Jonathan played his strongest card. At a shareholders' meeting, broadcast live across the networks, Jonathan unveiled a document, a sealed letter written by Edward Anderson himself. Jonathan held it up for the cameras. Jonathan, with a sly smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, Edward Anderson was a brilliant man, but even he had doubts. This letter proves it." Gasps rippled across the room. Elena's chest tightened. Jonathan unfolded the letter and read aloud. "I have built my life on mistakes and victories. If Elena Marquez cannot rise above betrayal, then she is not fit to carry my legacy. She must be tested, and only Richard Caldwell can decide her worth." The words sliced through Elena like knives. The room exploded in whispers. Jonathan's smile widened. Jonathan. There you have it. Even Edward himself questioned her. Do you really want this empire in the hands of a woman who is nothing more than an experiment? The humiliation was brutal. Cameras zoomed in on Elena's face. She kept her expression calm, but inside, her heart was breaking. When the meeting ended, Elena walked through the flashing cameras in silence. Every question shouted at her was an accusation. Are you Edward's mistake? Do you have the board's confidence? Is this the end of Anderson Global under your watch? By the time she reached her office, her composure was cracking. She slammed the door shut and collapsed into her chair, trembling. For the first time since inheriting the empire, she wondered if Jonathan was right. Richard entered quietly. Richard, you held yourself together in front of him. That matters. Elena's eyes burned with unshed tears. Elena, you knew about that letter, didn't you? Richard's silence was answer enough. Elena, furious, you knew Edward left this burden for me. You let me walk blind into his trap. Why? Richard's voice was steady. Richard, because this is what Edward wanted. He believes strength is not proven in comfort, but in fire. And you, Elena, are standing in the fire now. Elena rose, her voice breaking. Elena, and what if I burn? Richard's gaze softened, just slightly. Richard, then you were never meant to lead. Elena turned away, her heart heavy. She wanted to scream, to run, to vanish. But there was no escape. That night, she sat alone in her apartment, staring at the city lights. For the first time, she considered giving up. But then she thought of the people who had mocked her as invisible. The waitresses still working double shifts. The artists with no voice. The broken hearts like hers, who thought they were too small to matter. If she gave up now, she would prove them right. And that she could not allow. The next morning, Elena walked into Anderson Global with her head high. She would not collapse, not yet. But the war wasn't over. Jonathan Sterling had one more dagger to twist. That afternoon, Elena's office phone rang. When she answered, her blood ran cold. Voice on the line. Ms. Marquez. I thought you should know. The person leaking your strategies isn't Richard Caldwell. It's one of your own assistants. The name that followed shattered her. Maria Alvarez. Her assistant. The one person Elena had trusted completely. The woman who stayed late, who encouraged her when she doubted herself, who told her she believed in her. It was Maria who betrayed her. Elena confronted her in the office that evening. Elena, quietly, with hurt in her voice. Why, Maria? Why would you do this to me? Maria's eyes filled with tears. Maria, I didn't want to. Jonathan, he offered money. My family needed it. I thought you wouldn't survive in this world anyway. I thought, what difference would it make? Elena's chest ached. Elena, I believed in you. I trusted you. Maria lowered her head in shame. Maria, I'm sorry. I didn't know you'd fight this hard. I didn't know you'd actually matter. The words crushed her. Elena dismissed Maria quietly, without anger, without rage. The betrayal was too deep for shouting. When Maria left, Elena stood alone in her office, her heart heavier than ever. Jonathan had exposed Edward's doubts. Maria had sold her out. The board was losing faith. For the first time, Elena felt truly alone. And yet, in that silence, something shifted. She realized Edward hadn't chosen her because she was perfect. He had chosen her because she knew what it felt like to be broken, to be underestimated, to be betrayed. And still to stand. Elena whispered to herself, voice fierce through her tears. Elena, they want me to fall. They think I'm weak, but I've lived through worse than this. I've been invisible my whole life, and I survived. Now I fight." The next day, Elena returned to the boardroom. This time, she didn't wait for Jonathan to speak. She stood tall, holding a thick binder. Elena, calmly, "This is Edward Anderson's true legacy. Not vengeance, not rivalry, but vision. He wanted innovation. He wanted growth. And that is exactly what I intend to give this company." Jonathan scoffed, but she didn't flinch. Elena, with rising fire. "Yes, I was a waitress. Yes, I was invisible. But I learned more about resilience in those years than some of you have learned in your entire careers. I don't need your approval. I don't need your permission. I only need results. And that is what you will see." The room went silent. The executives stared at her, some doubtful, some impressed, but all listening. For the first time, Elena wasn't defending herself. She was leading. When she left the meeting, Jonathan's glare followed her, sharp and burning. He wasn't finished, she knew that. But as she walked down the hallway, something inside her had changed. She wasn't fighting to prove Edward right anymore. She was fighting to prove herself right. And this time, nothing would stop her. Elena strikes back, Jonathan falters, and the public showdown begins. Power is not taken in silence. It is seized in fire. And Elena Marquez was about to ignite a blaze that would shake the city. Jonathan Sterling had grown overconfident. He thought exposing Edward's letter would finish Elena. He thought Maria's betrayal would break her. But Elena had risen from every blow stronger, sharper, and more determined. Now it was her turn to strike. In the boardroom, Elena stood before the directors, her voice calm but unwavering. "Elena, for too long, Anderson Global has lived in Edward's shadow and Jonathan's games. That ends today. From this moment forward, we are not just a corporation. We are a force for change." The board shifted uneasily. "Elena, I am establishing the Marquez Foundation, dedicated to supporting underrepresented voices in art, education, and technology. This is not charity. This is investment. Investment in creativity, in innovation, in humanity itself." Jonathan scoffed loudly. "Jonathan, so this is your grand plan? To turn a Fortune 500 company into a charity case? Investors don't want sentiment, Ms. Marquez. They want profit." Elena turned her gaze on him, cold and steady. "Elena, profit without purpose is emptiness. Edward knew that. You never did. And that's why you will lose." The board murmured, divided, but Elena could see it. A spark of hope in their eyes. She was winning ground. News of the Marquez Foundation spread quickly. Headlines buzzed with surprise. "Heiress turns fortune into force for change. Elena Marquez pushes bold vision for Anderson Global. From waitress to world leader, the face of a new era." For the first time, Elena wasn't just surviving scandals. She was shaping the narrative. And Jonathan Sterling felt the walls closing in. At a charity gala weeks later, the tension between them boiled into open warfare. The grand ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and whispered gossip. Elena entered in a striking black gown, her presence commanding attention. Cameras flashed, eyes followed her every move. Jonathan, standing near the bar, watched her with thinly veiled contempt. As Elena greeted donors and artists, Jonathan approached, his smile venomous. "Jonathan, you've grown bold, Elena. But boldness doesn't win wars. Experience does." Elena's lips curved into a calm smile. "Elena, Funny. I thought integrity won wars. Something you wouldn't understand. Jonathan leaned closer, his voice a hiss meant only for her. Jonathan, you may have charmed the press, but behind the cameras, I still control the board. I still control the money. And when the time comes, you'll be nothing more than a footnote. Elena's eyes burned, but her voice was steady. Elena, you underestimate me, Jonathan. And you underestimate the power of a story. People are beginning to see who you really are. And soon, they won't follow you. Jonathan's smile faltered, just for a moment. And Elena knew she had struck a nerve. Later that evening, Jonathan gave a speech, trying to reclaim the spotlight. He boasted of his success, mocked Elena's foundation as a vanity project, and promised investors that true leadership still lay with him. But when Elena took the stage afterward, the room shifted. Elena, addressing the crowd. I once lived invisible, forgotten, overlooked. But in that invisibility, I learned something Jonathan Sterling never will, that strength is not built in comfort, but in struggle. That legacy is not measured in profits, but in lives touched. Edward Anderson believed in that, and I will carry it forward. Applause thundered through the ballroom. Cameras caught every word, broadcasting her conviction across the city. Jonathan's face tightened as the realization hit. She wasn't just challenging him in boardrooms. She was winning the public. The next morning, the fallout began. Stock prices that had wavered under Jonathan's attacks began to stabilize. Investors spoke cautiously in Elena's favor. The press declared the gala a turning point, the moment the invisible heiress became a true leader. Jonathan raged in private. His empire, once untouchable, was beginning to crack. But power never falls without blood. And Jonathan Sterling wasn't done fighting. Behind closed doors, he plotted his counterstrike. He began digging into Edward's past, searching for anything that could destroy Elena's credibility. And then he found it. A scandal buried decades ago, hidden in dusty archives. Edward Anderson's first company, the one Jonathan had betrayed him in, hadn't just collapsed from betrayal. There had been lawsuits, accusations of misconduct, whispers of corruption. If Jonathan exposed this, Edward's saintly image would crumble. And with it, Elena's claim to his legacy. Jonathan smirked as he whispered to one of his aides. Jonathan, she thinks she's untouchable. Let's see how strong her foundation is when the ground beneath it turns to dust. Elena, unaware of the storm brewing, continued her work. The Marquez Foundation launched its first major program, a funding initiative for young artists and educators. The event was raw emotional. Struggling painters, musicians, and teachers spoke of dreams that had been ignored, voices that had been silenced. Elena listened, tears in her eyes, as one young artist whispered, Young artist, no one ever believed in me. Until you. And in that moment, Elena realized this was her true legacy. Not boardroom victories, not headlines, but lives changed. But even as the applause rang in her ears, Jonathan's trap was being prepared. The press was about to explode with stories of Edward's hidden past. And when it did, everything Elena had built, the respect, the foundation, the hope, would be shaken to its core. Jonathan's final attack, Elena's collapse, and the ultimate confrontation. Every story has a breaking point. For Elena Marquez, that moment was about to arrive. The morning headlines were merciless. Edward Anderson, the corruption behind the legend. Anderson's first empire fell amid fraud allegations. Did Elena Marquez inherit a fortune built on lies? Jonathan Sterling had done it. He had unearthed the ghosts of Edward's past, and now He was using them to strangle Elena's credibility. Reporters swarmed outside Anderson Global. Cameras flashed. Microphones shoved into Elena's face. "Ms. Marquez, were you aware of Edward Anderson's corruption? Do you condone fraud? Are you unfit to lead a company tainted by scandal?" Every question was a blade. Inside the boardroom, Jonathan struck again. Jonathan, mocking. "So, Ms. Marquez, what will you say now? That Edward was perfect? That this empire was born without sin? The world knows better. And soon, they'll know you're no different." Elena's voice wavered, but she forced herself to stand tall. "Elena, Edward was not perfect. No one is. But he learned, he rebuilt, and he turned his failures into a vision for something greater." Jonathan smirked. "Jonathan, so you admit it. He was corrupt. And you are the face of that corruption reborn." The board erupted in whispers. Elena's defenses crumbled under the weight of Edward's past. That night, Elena returned home to silence. Her phone buzzed with endless messages, reporters, board members, even old acquaintances. Every voice asked the same question. "Are you fit to lead?" She sat in the dark, staring at the skyline, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. For the first time, she didn't know if she could fight anymore. In the stillness, she whispered to the ghost of Edward. "Elena, why me, Edward? Why did you choose me when your world was full of secrets I can't escape? I'm not strong enough for this." But then she remembered the faces from the foundation launch, the artists, the teachers, the dreamers who had looked at her with hope. They didn't see corruption. They didn't see scandal. They saw a woman who believed in them. And that was something Jonathan Sterling could never take away. The next morning, Elena made a decision. If Jonathan wanted a war, she would give him one. Not in shadows, not in whispers, but in the open, where the world could see the truth. The showdown was set for a press conference broadcast worldwide. Jonathan stood at one podium, Elena at another. Cameras flashed, millions watched. The air was electric with tension. Jonathan began, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Jonathan, the truth is simple. Edward Anderson was a fraud. His empire was tainted. And now his so-called heir carries on his deception. Elena Marquez is not a leader. She is a stain on Edward's already broken legacy." Gasps rippled through the room. Jonathan's words were cruel, sharp, final. Then Elena stepped forward. Her voice was calm, steady, but fierce. "Elena, yes, Edward made mistakes. Yes, he stumbled. But he did not let failure define him. He rebuilt, he created, he gave this city opportunities it had never known. His legacy is not corruption. It is resilience. It is vision. It is hope." She paused, scanning the room. Every eye was on her. Elena with fire. "And as for me, I was invisible once. A waitress. Forgotten. Betrayed. But I survived. I rose. And I will not let Jonathan Sterling, or anyone else, decide my worth. My legacy begins today. And it is built on truth, on empathy, and on the unshakable belief that even the invisible deserve to be seen." The room erupted. Some reporters clapped. Some shouted questions. The world had just witnessed a woman refusing to break under the weight of the past. Jonathan's face twisted with rage. He leaned into the microphone, his mask slipping. Jonathan, snarling, "You think this is about empathy? This is about power. And I will never let you have it." The cameras caught it, the venom in his words, the desperation in his eyes. For the first time, the public saw Jonathan Sterling not as a titan, but as a man terrified of losing control. The fallout was immediate. Headlines blared. Elena Marquez stands tall amid Sterling attack. Sterling's rage backfires. Heiress gains sympathy. From invisible to unbreakable, Elena Marquez wins the moment. Jonathan's empire began to crumble. Investors pulled away. The board, once divided, began to shift toward Elena. The tide had turned. That night, Elena returned to Edward's office. She sat at his desk, the weight of the empire heavy on her shoulders, but no longer crushing her. She opened one of his old journals, reading his final words to her. Elena, true strength is not in never falling. It is in rising, again and again. That is why I chose you. That is why you will succeed. Tears blurred her vision, but her heart felt steady. For the first time, she believed those words. She wasn't just Edward's heir. She wasn't just Jonathan's rival. She was Elena Marquez, and she was ready to lead. Jonathan's downfall, Elena's legacy, and the final transformation. Every empire ends one of two ways, with collapse or with rebirth. For Elena Marquez, the choice was clear. In the weeks following the press conference, Jonathan Sterling's empire began to unravel. The public no longer saw him as a visionary. They saw arrogance, desperation, and greed. Investors withdrew support. His allies distanced themselves. Whispers turned to headlines. Sterling's grip weakens. From titan to tyrant, Jonathan Sterling's fall. And as his world crumbled, Elena's star rose higher. But victory was not without scars. Elena still carried the weight of betrayal. Maria's deception lingered in her heart. The board remained wary, waiting for her to stumble. And Richard Caldwell still watched her like a hawk, judging whether she was truly worthy of Edward's empire. Yet with every passing day, Elena grew stronger, her voice steadier, her vision clearer. She was no longer the invisible woman who lived in shadows. She was light, fierce, unshakable, undeniable. One afternoon, Richard entered her office, his expression unreadable. Richard, you've done well. Better than I expected. Elena smiled faintly. Elena, is that your way of saying I've passed Edward's test? Richard studied her for a long moment. Then, for the first time, a hint of warmth touched his eyes. Richard, you haven't just passed. You've redefined it. Edward chose you well. Elena exhaled, relief washing over her. She had finally earned the approval she once feared she'd never receive. Jonathan Sterling's final blow came in the form of desperation. He tried to orchestrate a hostile takeover of Anderson Global, rallying what little influence he had left. But when the votes were counted, the board sided with Elena. Jonathan's empire collapsed that night. The man who once mocked her as invisible was now the one forgotten, his name etched into history not as a titan, but as a warning. Elena had won. But for Elena, victory wasn't about Jonathan's defeat. It was about what came next. She poured herself into the Marquez Foundation, expanding its reach beyond New York. Programs for young artists flourished. Scholarships opened doors for underprivileged students. Innovators received funding for ideas the world had ignored. Every life touched by her work was a reminder of why she fought. She was no longer fighting for Edward's legacy. She was building her own. At the grand opening of a new Marquez Foundation Center, Elena stood before a crowd of students, teachers, and dreamers. Elena, when I was invisible, I thought my life had no value. I thought the world had already decided my worth. But I was wrong. Worth isn't given by others, it's claimed by us. And today, I promise you this, you are seen. You are valued. And your voice matters. The applause thundered, echoing through her soul. That night, as Elena walked through the gallery of young artists, whose work now hung proudly on the walls, she paused before a painting. It was a portrait of a woman standing in the shadows, her eyes glowing with quiet strength. Beneath it, the artist had written, "Invisible no more." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. For the first time, she saw herself not through the judgment of others, but through the truth of her journey. She had risen. She had transformed. She had become a leader not defined by wealth or vengeance, but by empathy and resilience. Elena Marquez's story is not just about inheriting a fortune. It is about surviving betrayal. It is about rising from invisibility. It is about proving that true power is not in money, but in the courage to be seen, to stand, and to lead with heart. She began as a woman forgotten. She became a woman unforgettable. And that is the story of Elena Marquez. A story of resilience, betrayal, and ultimate triumph. But now, I want to hear from you. Backhand index pointing right, what part of Elena's journey inspired you the most? Was it her rise from invisibility, her courage against betrayal, or her final triumph over Jonathan Sterling? Let us know in the comments below. Your thoughts make this community stronger. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next powerful tale. And of course, share this video with someone who needs a reminder that even in the darkest moments, resilience can turn invisibility into legacy. Until next time, remember, true strength is found not in never falling, but in always rising.